Thank you. It's wonderful to see you. And welcome to Congress, a cornerstone of democracy, featuring U.S. Representative Will Hurd in conversation with UVA's Jen Lawless. As many of you know, and it's great to see some of your faces again, this is the third in a series led by the Karsh Institute of Democracy. And our goal was to bring members of Congress and other experts in conversation with the public to discuss the state of democratic institutions, in particular the U.S. Congress. We want to talk about the challenges, the solutions, and the way forward. As many of you probably know, the framers of the Constitution designated Congress as first among equals, underscoring its significance in the democratic framework. It's entrusted with creating laws, allocating federal funds, executive branch oversight, and in fact, I often, when I engage with students and others, often say, think about the many ways in which your life has been touched by the U.S. government, and in particular the work of Congress, since you woke up this morning. Just think about that. Congress directly influences various aspects of daily life, including healthcare and education, immigration, national security, our infrastructure, and the list just goes on and on. Through representation in the House of Representatives and the Senate, it ensures that diverse regional and political perspectives contribute to the nation's governance. Now, of course, that requires some essential things: debate, compromise, consensus building, all the things that are necessary for a healthy and thriving representative democracy. And Congress's bicameral structure, comprising the House and the Senate, was designed to balance the interests of both populous and less populous states, ensuring equitable representation. This design encourages deliberation, at least it's supposed to, and prevents the concentration of power, thereby safeguarding individual liberties. However, challenges persist in fulfilling these responsibilities. I think we all know this, we see it, we feel it, we hear about it. And critics argue that partisanship and legislative gridlock hinder Congress's ability to effectively meet the needs of the American population. And that sentiment has translated into public opinion. In a September 2024 Gallup poll, when respondents were asked how much trust they had in Congress, 46% said, not very much, and 19% said none at all. That's 20% of those polled, none at all. Only 4% said that they trusted the legislative branch a great deal. But in that same poll, 74%, that's 3/4 of those who were asked this question, said that they support the role that Congress plays in checking the power of the presidency, a statistic that defies party affiliation and has remained steady for nearly a decade. So as we enter into a new alignment for the branches of our federal government, how can Congress fulfill its obligation to its constituents and to the Constitution? At a time when more and more Americans believe our democratic institutions cannot get the job done, what steps must be taken by our elected representatives to address this challenge, and what boundaries do the Constitution and democratic norms place on those actions? The goal of this series, as I said, is to host conversations with members of Congress from across the ideological spectrum. You think about some of the people that we've had already, they represent different voices and different perspectives in our government and in our population. And we want to hear their assessment of the challenges and the steps necessary to regain the trust and support of the American people. Today's guest is the Honorable Will Hurd, and he served in Congress from 2015 until 2021, representing Texas's 23rd Congressional District in the U.S. House. In addition to his tenure in Congress, he served as a CIA officer, cybersecurity executive, and presidential candidate. In his career, he has thwarted terror attacks, tackled cybersecurity challenges, and addressed national issues like AI and U.S.-China relations. As a managing director at Allen & Company and a trustee at the German Marshall Fund, former Congressman Hurd advanced technology and public policy. His leadership spans matters concerning national security, innovation, and governance, and we are thrilled that you made the trip to be with us today. Moderating the conversation is my colleague and friend, UVA's Jennifer Lawless. Professor Lawless is the Leone Reaves and George W. Spicer Professor of Politics, and she's chair of the Department of Politics at the University of Virginia. Her research focuses on political ambition, campaigns and elections, and media and politics. Jen has also authored 8 books, including Newshole, The Demise of Local Journalism and Political Engagement. Professor Lawless frequently contributes to national media outlets, offering expert commentary on American politics. So I want to thank you again, former Representative Hurd, Professor Lawless, and I'm going to turn this over to you to begin the conversation.
One administrative detail, smile, make sure we...
Thank you. Speaking of technology. Okay, we look forward to it.
Thank you all very much for joining us. I have a handheld microphone because I committed the major faux pas this morning of wearing something that doesn't accommodate a lavalier mic, so I apologize. I want to start out by building on some of the statistics that Melody mentioned. Although it's true that congressional approval has been hovering at an all-time low for quite some time, and people don't have much faith in the institution, members themselves have no problem getting reelected. And so, there's a national poll that asks people, do you think Congress would function better if we replaced every single member with a random person walking down the street? And 49% of people say yes. But then, when you're asked about your own member of Congress, you're almost always willing to say, yeah, I'm gonna vote for that person again. And even members that are mired in scandal have about a 90% chance of getting reelected if they decide to run. So, having campaigned, having served, I'm wondering, can you sort of shed some light on that disconnect? And are the numbers that Melody shared as bad as they sound, given that people actually do approve of their own member?
Yes, the numbers are that bad. And first off, thanks for having me, and it's great to be with y'all. When I was in Congress, I would always quote, there was a study done that Congress had a less approval rating than the Exxon Valdez oil spill and Ebola, right? And but ultimately, why is there a disparity about what people think about Congress as an organization and their individual congressmen? They all suck except for my guy or gal, right? And that's ultimately what it is. And despite what, we oftentimes think about Congress and individual Congress people based on what we see on the news. We don't look at what are they doing in the district, how are their constituent relations and constituent contacts, and the reason that you have some of the people that is not your member of Congress that you don't like, you're not seeing what they're doing back in the district. And there are some people that I've always wondered, like, how did that person get elected? But they're the gold standard when they go back in a district. And I can give 2 examples, 2 people that are no longer in Congress. Louis Gohmert, who's would probably be one of the original, kind of Freedom Caucus guys from East Texas, but he did so many great things for folks in the district. And then you have Sheila Jackson Lee, may she rest in peace. Sheila Jackson Lee, if she would meet someone, and she, no one would ever call her a moderate Democrat, right? If somebody was from her town, from Houston, she'd be like, what street did you live on? What's the cross street? And she would know the bodega, and so you don't always see that contact. So that's what I would say, what delineates the two. And look, I was one of the few people that actually represented a competitive district. 92% of House seats are decided in the primary. And I think the final countdown, there was 33 that were competitive this last cycle. So that's 402 seats are decided in the primary. I'm one of the few people that actually had to run in a general. And that issue exacerbates even more. It makes it more difficult because I had to appeal to a much broader audience. Oh, and by the way, in those primaries, an average contested primary only has about 70,000 voters. And then a general election generally has north of 250,000. And so what would you rather have? 35,001 people deciding who's going to Congress, or 125,000, right? The law of average numbers suggests more people, you get a better option.
So assuming that members are aware of the fact that as long as they can keep their own constituents happy, they can get reelected, how does the low approval rating affect the day-to-day business of the institution itself? Like, is that something that you guys talked about? I mean, it was pretty crummy when you were there too. That's a technical term.
Yeah. So it's funny. So how do you get elected? You get elected by creating contrast, right? I got elected, nobody thought a black Republican in a 72% Latino district was going to win, right? And I got elected because I was able to create contrast with the guy that was in, and my my promise to the district was, you're going to see me. You're not going to always agree with me, but you're going to see me, and I'm going to represent you in a way you hadn't seen the other guy, right? And so, and people took that bait. And one of the things I found myself doing a lot, and I ran for Congress because I got pissed. I was in the CIA, my job was recruit spies, steal secrets, best job on the planet. I was in India 2 years, Pakistan 2 years, Afghanistan a year and a half. And in addition to working on the most important challenges facing our country from a national security perspective, I had to brief members of Congress. And I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials, and some guy ruined my life by suggesting I run for Congress. No, I didn't. I went and ruined his life by making him my first chief of staff. And so I was critical of the institution. And then when I got in, I was still critical of the institution. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm part of this thing. And so if those that are in it are not, this is the only industry where you can be part of it and it not work and you don't get criticized for it, right? And so it's weird that it works that way. So yes, the 435 House members, 1,000 senators, and the Senate does a little bit better job of talking about the importance of the institution than the House does. If you are constantly being part of it and criticizing the thing that you're in, like I'm the insider trying to change it and you're not trying to change it, then this is going to continue to exist. And that's unfortunate because there are still, it plays an important role in our society. Our framers, originally this was supposed to be the only publicly elected. I know, brother, I feel the same way. We were supposed to be the only ones that were actually elected. And we were supposed to deal with the vagaries of the public. And so we have to, you talked earlier about this concentration of power in the hands of a few. We're starting to see that now in Congress, and leadership, whether you're in the majority or the minority, are the ones that are deciding a lot of the work, and it's not getting pushed down to folks, on the committee. So there's a number of structural problems that continue to have these, to see this, hate, people not like it.
So I think one of the things that public opinion polls reveal is people say that they'd be more pleased and they would have higher congressional approval if Congress got more stuff done. The reality is that Congress still gets quite a bit of stuff done, right? And so I guess this is a two-part question. The first is it worth emphasizing that, right? Like, is it worth sort of taking a campaign to the American people to let them know that it's not that bad, when there are a lot of things that Congress is not getting done that are important to people? So, is there something to be done on that front? But second, on a day-to-day basis, like, how do you, and how, when you were in Congress and now, how do members of Congress sort of think about the day-to-day things that the American people depend on them for versus these very big policy changes that are always so difficult to implement?
Sure. Members of Congress get elected. Those big policy things going on the news, right? Those are on these big policy issues, right? And one of the things that I found representing a competitive congressional district, and also my recent run, and for those that didn't know, I ran for president. I was obviously unsuccessful because I'm sitting here talking with y'all rather than getting ready for a transition. But way more unites us than divides us. Look, despite we're talking about how bad things are and how could this have happened or what, like way more unites us as a country than divides us. However, we've only focused on those things that divide us, right? Winning a campaign, you got to create contrast, right? So to win, you always focus on those things that you don't agree on. Now, I continued to get elected because I actually got things done. I literally said, you're going to see me more. So I kept track of how many town halls and places I went. I represent 29 counties, 2 time zones, 820 miles of the border between the U.S. and Mexico. It took 10 and a half hours to drive across my district from one end to the other at 80 miles an hour, which was the speed limit in most of the district. And my chief of staff found out it's not the speed limit in all of the district. And so I kept track. There's a county called Loving County. Only 95 people live in the entire county. And it's the size of Rhode Island. I've met 75 people, right? And I remember going to the county judge. I was like, there's still 20 people I haven't met. And he's like, Hurd, they don't want to be met. And I was like, check, I've met everybody, right? They knew how hard it was to get to Loving County. So I said, you're going to see me more. I proved it. One of the reasons I got elected. I criticized the guy before me because he had been in there a number of years and only gotten one piece of legislation signed into law. My first year, I got 7 pieces of legislation signed into law, and I went back and explained it. Now, people knew me as the IT procurement guy. Nobody's ever held a parade for IT procurement. Nobody's ever run a commercial or a piece of mail on IT procurement. But I'd go back and be like, hey, federal government spends $90 billion with a B on purchasing IT goods and services. And 80% of that is on old, outdated stuff. And whether you're a farmer or a rancher or a cybersecurity professional, you're like, what? And then I'd be like, here's what we're doing about it. People walk out and be like, that's my guy. You know, he's solving problems, right? And so yes, at an individual level to get reelected, if you show you're solving problems, you have a chance to win. Now, is that going to improve the broader understanding of Congress and make people be like, oh, I love Congress because they're solving these big things? No. But it's also for, like, you know, we always would have a saying, there's show horses and work horses, right? Or, you know, I would say there's people that, you know, are problem solvers or bomb throwers, right? The way you beat bomb throwers is be like, hey, they're not doing anything for you except going on TV. So this notion that it's inevitable that somebody that's in office is going to win, I don't subscribe to that because I've just disproved it. But yes, as an individual, if you're showing that you're getting things done, then you're gonna continue to be in office.
I don't subscribe to it either. I challenged a popular incumbent in a primary, but I'm sitting here too, so we all know how that turned out. So let me segue a little bit now to the relationship between Congress and the presidency, because that plays a major role in what Congress can get done or how they're going to get it done. So first, what do you think about the way Congress has interacted with the Biden administration? And what do you think are going to be the biggest changes, not necessarily policy-wise, but in terms of procedure and in terms of, you know, how the institution operates vis-a-vis the White House starting Monday?
Well, the changes is unified government means, you know, you're going to get potentially a lot more done. I can make an argument that a president can only get one thing done, right? If you go back, President Biden actually got 2, but the second COVID stimulus I don't count because it was unique. A unique period in time, but he got the infrastructure deal. President Trump he got one thing done. That was tax cut. President Obama got one thing done, which was healthcare. These are the ones that I was involved in and saw. So I think you're going to have you know, more interest in moving in one direction. But again, when President Trump was in the first time and had unified government, he wasn't able to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. So there are some limitations to that. The House is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government. And when I first got in, so the day, you know, you have votes Monday through Thursday, or Tuesday through Friday. And fly-in day is whatever that first day is, you come in. And usually the day after fly-in day, you meet with your caucus. So Republicans get together, Democrats get together. And I would admit, at the end of a Republican meeting, I always called it open mic night. Everybody got to get up and speak to leadership about whatever, and they only got 1 minute. And they were always being like, we need to take back our Article 1 power, Article 1 power, Article 1 power, Article 1. This weeks goes on. And I go to my chief of staff, and they get mad when I admit this. I was like, hey, what do they mean by Article 1 power? And they're like, Article 1 of the Constitution, you ding dong, And I was like, oh, okay, I understood that. I had never been in Congress. I wasn't a staffer. I didn't follow these things. I didn't know the vernacular, right? And I was like, oh. But oftentimes you talk about you want this Article 1 power. You only care about that when the other team is sitting in the White House. You don't care about it as much when your own person wearing the same jersey is there. So I think that's a dangerous precedent in that the head of the party is usually the person that is in office. And so there is a too much is given to that person, right? And I think that has something that has exacerbated over the years. And I can make that argument under any government that has had a unified government. I also think one of the bigger problems is that most elected officials and even voters believe unified government is the best way to govern. It's actually the absolute worst way to govern. When you think about all the major pieces of legislation that has stuck, it's all been in divided government, all right? And that forces you to solve real problems that are going to last. In unified government, you do something, and the next government comes in. They always try to undo that thing, and and I think that goes to the broader question we're talking about of people not caring and thinking, that having a bad opinion of Congress. So what are we going to see? We're going to see more unification behind what's happening in the White House, which is what we saw when President Obama had unified government, what we saw for parts of Trump 1.0.
I think something that was a little different with Obama was that the margin in the House was different, right, and the Senate too, so the Democrats had a little bit more wiggle room. And I remember, for example, around Obamacare, Nancy Pelosi basically giving permission to a bunch of members to vote the way that they needed to, the same thing with cap and trade, so that they weren't going to give up, they weren't going to risk losing their seats. Now, neither party has the flexibility to let a member off the hook. So what role does the leadership, is there even a role for leadership in that case? Like if they can't let anybody off the hook and all they can do is provide the stick, not the carrot, what happens?
You got to work with the other side.
And there's very little incentive for the Democrats right now to help, right? Like so.
Well, we'll see. So the fact, Dick Durbin, the number two Democrat in the Senate, saying he's going to vote to support Marco Rubio, that's not taking a real risk, right? But it's a sign that hey, we're willing to work. But yeah, margins really do matter. You still have last week in the House, you had some Republicans doing procedural motions that make the House move a lot slower, and it's like you're criticizing, or you're causing your own team to have a problem. But a narrow margin that Mike Johnson has in the House is going to be difficult. It's going to be even more difficult when Congresswoman Stefanik gets nominated and confirmed to be the UN ambassador, because if one person is sick or if one person's flight's delayed and you don't have the numbers on the floor, there are procedural things that allow the minority party to ultimately take over. And that's I think the possibility for something like that to happen in the next few months is incredibly high, and both sides know about that. So you're going to see some parliamentarian, if you're a Robert's Rules of Order fan, this is like going to be better than Netflix. it's difficult, right? And yes, now some would say nothing happening is actually not a bad option. Because if you don't like what's possibly going to happen, nothing happening may not be bad, and ultimately that's a check, right? And let's also remind ourselves that the system was not designed to be efficient. It was designed to make it difficult for any person, even when you have all levers of government in your favor, to get big things done. It was designed that way so that this experiment, which has been fragile and always will be fragile, is continuing to exist.
So I say this, it's going to sound snippy, and it's not like, do you think Donald Trump knows that? Because, so typically when new presidents come to power, they acknowledge that, right? In part to lower expectations for what they are going to be able to accomplish, but also because they want to at least extend an olive branch and suggest that it's important for the different branches to work together. That's not Trump's MO. Sure. And so, like when he starts on Monday afternoon, do you think he's prepared for the fact that there might not be, unanimity among the Republicans around everything he wants to do?
I think he understands that for sure. But I also think he believes in his own talents to defy the odds, right? Like whether you like the incoming president or not, we have to admit the things he's been able to accomplish, nobody thought was possible, right? And so trying to handicap whether it's going to work or not, I think it's difficult, but I think he understands the restrictions and the difficulties, and I would not be surprised that he's like, but I'm different, and he's going to be able to manage that, right? And look, for all of us, whether you liked it or not, we should also want, as this new administration begins, to be like, hey, we want you to be successful. We want there to be work this out. We want there to be, Mike Johnson to be able to navigate and get things done. The one thing I will say, Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries actually have a very good working relationship. That kind of relationship between the two of them hasn't existed in a really long time. And part of it is because they both came, I don't want to say Hakeem came to power quickly. But look, Hakeem and I worked on a lot of stuff together. But they didn't have a long history of fighting each other. And then you have Thune on the Senate side that hasn't been in some of these public fights. And so this is, my dad always taught me to have a PMA, a positive mental attitude. There's an opportunity here. Whether that opportunity is taken or not, who knows? Some would say unlikely, right? But in the end, I think President Trump knows what's in front of him.
I would just say that I think part of the challenge is that, for half the country pretty much, if Trump succeeds, that seems like an affront to everything that they stand for. And so a lot of the sort of big ticket items that were on the campaign agenda are, incredibly appalling and threatening to a lot of people and super important to others. And so, I think that's why gauging success of this administration or the lack of success is so difficult, because the different sides view it so differently. I want to move a little bit to a third broad topic, and that has to do with the media environment now. And, as a CNN junkie, I'm accustomed to, watching constantly. I'm on a brief hiatus, but I plan to rejoin soon. And, members of Congress come on all the time. CNN has Republican members. They have more Democratic than Republican members, but they do have a lot of Republicans. And I'm just wondering what... They
have a lot of Republicans.
They do?
Yeah, and I think MSNBC does too, right?
Yeah.
And the offer's always there, right? I think a lot of times people are afraid to go on.
I don't blame CNN for that. I mean, a lot of the time, and when the Republicans come on, I think they're generally treated well too.
Sure,
it's
100%.
So, but I guess my question is, do you think that, appearing on cable news as a sitting member of Congress or as a member of the administration is a service? Are you doing a good thing, or are you sort of like raising expectations in a way that the public now is, thinking about Congress being able to do something that they can't? Is it showboating? Like, what do you think is how does the typical member of Congress think about those kinds of requests, and what's the point of doing the national news when you really care about getting reelected in your own district?
The point of doing the national news is that people in your district are watching it, right? And so the number one most watched show in my district was George Stephanopoulos, right, on Sundays. And I never told him that, because that's why that was always my first ask. And so part of that is it is a platform in order to get your message out, right? Then you take that and leverage it on social media, right? And you cut it and you push it in the other areas that you're doing it. But ultimately, when you're doing those things, you are trying to your number one audience is the people back home that are ultimately watching. Is the responsibility. And then, look, when you look at hearings in Capitol Hill, you can say the same thing. People are doing the things on those hearings, not necessarily because they want to get the information that they seek. It's because they're going to take that 5-minute C-SPAN clip, cut it up, and use it on their socials, right? In order to communicate to the people that are following them. But yeah, look, it's more should go on. I always say, if you can't, if you're having difficult time defending your position, then maybe you need to rethink your position, right? If you can't handle questions, then you're pretty crummy at your job. And so I think it's something that more should do in order to try to articulate. Look, I often went on things to talk about national security issues to try to help people have some perspective on the challenges that we're facing. I always have a take or an opinion, but I always tried to be thoughtful about it. And so yeah, I never thought of it, I'm doing this public service by getting reamed by Wolf Blitzer, but it was something that I think you have to do.
So building on the national security piece here, we've heard a lot about foreign policy challenges that the new administration is going to be, taking on, that Congress obviously plays a role in. And so what have your general reactions been regarding, discussions of Greenland and the Panama Canal and Canada being the 51st state? I mean, is this all just talk? Members of the Republicans in Congress have sort of drafted a resolution about potential military intervention into Greenland. Like, does this happen all the time and we don't hear about it? Or is this sort of like a new level?
This is unique, right? Like, look, these are not things, these would not be things I would be prioritizing, especially when it comes to working with your allies, right? The most important geopolitical threat the United States of America and our allies are facing is the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. It's not China, it's not the Chinese culture, right? It's the Chinese government, and we need to be clear on that. And the Chinese government is trying to surpass the United States of America as the sole global superpower. They've made that clear in their documents and the things that they've said, and all of this is going to come to a head around Taiwan. And I always go back to my brother. Does my brother care about defending Taiwan? No. Okay, and how do we articulate why that matters? How do we articulate the impact that if China is successful in reunification of Taiwan and mainland China, the impact that's going to have on our economy, the impact it's going to have on our kids and our grandkids' ability to get jobs, on our ability to have services, because the impact it's going to have on our budget, right? Like, all of these things is the single most important issue. And the only way that we're going to deal with China is to have a posse, right? And there's no better posse than NATO. There's no better, other countries would love to have Mexico and Canada as neighbors. And we have benefited from a world order that we built following World War II. An erosion of that hurts us, and it helps our adversaries. And the rest of the world, and especially Europe, is making a decision: do we stick with America, or do we go with someone who's just trying to give us cheaper goods and giving us less grief about how we do things, right? And that's the issue that's at play here, and I would be spending more time on that. The issue of autonomy, right? The New Jersey drones was, a lot of people were talking about that before the holidays. There was a bigger story a couple of weeks before at Langley Air Force Base. You had drones that were 20 feet in length, right? That's not hobbyist. Those aren't DJI drones you can buy at Best Buy. Well, you can't buy DJI drones down at Best Buy, but those aren't hobbyist drones, right? And if we can't detect one, how are we going to detect swarms, right? How are we going to defend against quantum computing? You and I remember Y2K, right? For those that don't know, Y2K at the turn of everybody thought the world was going to end. And it was because our computer systems, the year in software was only 2 digits. And when it went to the year 2000, we didn't know what was going to happen, and the federal government spent $4 billion with a B. There was a special select committee on Y2K. Now, nothing happened, right? But the transition from dealing with quantum computers that are going to be able to break all the encryption that we have, like these are things that I think it requires a whole of government in some of the areas that I would have been spending time on.
I was at a party it was becoming 2000, and when the clock struck midnight, we all just held our breath, and then we're like, wait before it gets 12:01. This is the,
Exactly.
I'm going to ask one final question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So if people have questions, you can feel free to line up at the microphone. But the final question that I have for you builds on what you just said, which is, how do members of Congress go about identifying priorities like you're talking about when those aren't necessarily the priorities of the administration? Even if there's not necessarily conflict between the administration's positions and Congress's,
Sure.
How do you affect the prioritization?
Yeah, so look, I got 21 pieces of legislation signed into law in 6 years. That's a lot. That most people that are in office for 2 or 3 decades don't get that many. And I can say almost all 21 of those pieces was stuff that originated in the district. It was somebody had an idea. And the other thing, we don't always see how we're lucky if you don't have a problem where you have to go to the federal government, right? There are a number of issues where a voter, a taxpayer is having some problem, the federal bureaucracy is impacting them some way, and you have to go to your member of Congress. And oftentimes, what I learned is, if one person's having that problem, then probably hundreds of thousands of people are having that problem. And so those were some of the things that we looked at. And I was successful because I actually never wrote legislation until I had a Democratic partner. And remind you, I was when Speaker Pelosi was Speaker, she didn't want to do me no favors, right? And she knew if I got a piece of legislation passed, I was going to be going back in the district, beating my chest and being like, I did that thing, right? And so you always had to have a Dem partner. And then eventually I made sure I always had a Republican Dem partner in the Senate to make sure. And then the co-sponsors, I always got people on the relevant committees I needed to do in order to manage it. So that's how I determined the things that were working. And look, I got asked, because of my experience in national security, because of my experience in cybersecurity, people in the district would always ask me questions about that. So I spent time on working those issues. So it was, and look, what do I know about healthcare other than getting it? I was never in the industry, right? I'm not going to have some unique insights into this. But I know a few things or two about how to defend digital infrastructure from bad guys trying to blow it up, or people trying to sneak into our country to do bad things, right? And so I spent time on those things that I had a natural experience with, that I didn't need to go to think tanks and this to figure out what the answer was. And so that's how I was individually successful. And then on those big macro issues that affect the entire, well, again, every piece of legislation I did affected the entire country. But those big issues we talk about on the news, that's where you rely on people back in the district.
Okay, let's go to the audience.
So this is age before beauty, right?
Yeah.
It's nice to hear about the possibility of a personal relationship between Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Johnson. In general, how are we going to make possible that kind of personal relationship that you say is one of the features of getting elected, personal relationships and getting things done? How are we going to replace the perception that's driven by narrative by personal relationships?
Sure.
Is it possible in Congress?
Look, is it possible? Absolutely. Okay, so here's what we can all do, right? Let's mirror the behavior we want to see. I guarantee nobody in this room has ever clicked on an article that said Congress worked, right? But I bet you most of y'all know how much money George Santos made on Cameo, right? So are we encouraging the behavior that we want to see, right? How many of y'all have ever shared or said something positive about somebody from the other party that you don't identify with, right? Like, are we exhibiting that behavior? If we don't exhibit that behavior, then we're not going to see our elected officials do that. Are we rewarding people for that kind of behavior, right? And I think that's where it starts. And I'm assuming, people that are coming to a lecture on this third day of school about how Congress works, y'all probably vote in primaries, okay? But are we encouraging other people and getting other folks to participate in that? Because the low participation levels is the reason that we have some of the stuff that we don't like. And so, but it starts with us. And do we show that kind of behavior? And then when we see behavior we like, do we appreciate that?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Hi. You've once said that the Republican Party in America, or that if the Republican Party in America doesn't start looking like America, you're not going to have a Republican Party. What is the biggest challenge that you face to make you say this? And do you think that the Republican Party kind of adheres to that as well? Or do you think they view that as the same way you do?
Well, look, I would say Republicans have been successful in this last election cycle because there were more Latinos, more African Americans, women with college degree in the suburbs, right, voted for them. Now, when I said those words because I was worried that in the three largest growing groups of voters, we were not doing well, and that third group would be folks under the age of 25, right? And so that is what actually ultimately happened in this most recent election, and I think my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle did not recognize their waning impact and influence into some of these communities. Now, I also remind people the increase in black and brown folks voting for the Republicans. Yes, an increase. It was not gigantic, right? But it was still an increase. So yeah, I think the Republican Party is going to continue to be able to be successful if you appeal to folks on things that they care about. And what is that? The issue of, are you going to be able to have a good paying job in the economy? It was a huge issue. And voters thought the Republican Party, in many cases, was going to do better. That's why some of these Senate races went towards Republican. An example where it didn't, Michigan with Alyssa Slotkin is one that, I think she's the only one that where Trump won a state. Oh, and Tammy, yeah, Tammy. So those are examples. And when you look at what was Alyssa talking about, she was not kind of using some of the traditional democratic orthodoxy, right? And so that's why I said those things when I said like. But I also at the same time said the public, one of the things the public party needs to do is don't be racist, don't be misogynist, don't be a homophobe, don't be jerks, basically, because that's something that is used against us at times as well.
Can I just interject here? Oh, also Jackie Rosen.
That's right.
3 women, all women.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
Just to build on this point for a little bit, so there's no question that the economy did play a huge role in the election. There's no question that among Latino men and African American men, that was an important issue. But I think it's hard to make the case when you look at the national campaign that it wasn't racist and it wasn't sexist and it wasn't transphobic, right? It's like so. And when you look at some of the ads that were aired specifically in battleground states, it was some of those messages, like an anti-immigrant message, the anti-trans messages, that might have, upped voter turnout among, some of those voters. So I'm just wondering, like, what's acceptable?
So you know my position on these things. I think all that stuff.
No, but I mean for the party in general, what do you accept?
In general, so are you implying that? It's the transphobic and racist blacks and Latinos that voted for Republicans?
No. I'm saying that if the Latinos and the African Americans voted for Republicans largely because of the economy, which frankly is why a lot of people voted for Republicans.
Sure.
Like, how do we sort of thread the needle of a party and the head of the party, because this wasn't the case in every district or in every state, also embracing positions and values that are sort of like anathema to what Americans generally believe in. Like, if this wasn't the example of that happening, it's hard to imagine what there is. And like, so how do we deal with that moving forward?
Sure. Look, I've made my opinions on those things very clear. But let's take a place I know, Texas, right? The reason that you had an increase in Latino voters on the border over the last 3 cycles had absolutely nothing to do with some of that transphobic rhetoric, even though that was probably more to drive out a certain segment of what would someone call the base. The change in voters was 2 issues. It's the version of defund the police, and that is wrapping Democrats around this notion that they do not support law enforcement. And when you look at the border in Texas, the number is like 62% of households in South and West Texas have someone who's in law enforcement. Border Patrol, sheriff, local police, you name it. Then the other issue is on energy, right? And yes, climate change is real and humans are having an impact on that, right? But also our energy needs are increasing and that oil and natural gas are things that are going to be needed as we transition into the future. And in South Texas, you have the Eagle Ford Shale, and in West Texas, you have the Permian Basin. And the number of people along the border whose livelihood has significantly increased because of the energy sector. The opposition and belief that the Democratic Party was against the energy sector are 2 things that drove this, because it all came down to their pocketbooks and bottom line. And some of what I believe is crazy rhetoric, they pushed aside because they're like, I don't believe that way, I don't need to believe that way, but I want to make sure that I'm able to take care of, put food on the table, roof over our head, right? I think, and again, it's hard to make broader look, if I knew what voters were doing, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? But that's kind of that. Those are the things. And look, I think in 2016, all the what's it called after the when they vote and the what? Exit polling. The exit polling. was like, yeah, we don't believe anything. We don't believe in the platform of Donald Trump, but we like he's gonna be different, right? I think there's some of that too.
Okay, next question. We have a whole bunch of people lined up.
Yeah, sorry.
You've asked one, right?
Hi, so I'm curious, based on your history in cybersecurity, how do you see the role of AI playing out, especially with our conflict with China? And secondarily, how would you propose that Congress handles the balance between promoting AI research while also regulating it for our citizens?
Look, I was on the board of OpenAI. I was one of the good board members. I wasn't there when the coup happened. I was there when we released ChatGPT. And I held the first hearing on AI in Congress. It's crazy. I think it was in 2017. It's like 2017. Really, I'm the first one to hold a hearing. It's kind of scary. Look, I always say AI is the equivalent of nuclear fission. Controlled, you get nuclear power, clean, limitless power that can light the world. Uncontrolled, you get nuclear weapons that can blow up the world, right? And when it comes to what we should be doing with AI, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, and Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, literally the two leading AI labs, all think that there has to be some kind of oversight. And I think we start with some basic stuff. AI needs to follow the law. It sounds so simple, right? People are like, it's supposed to follow the law. No, it's like the way our law is written, if it doesn't say AI, you can be like, oh, well, it doesn't say AI, what does it mean, right? And what do I mean by follow the law? It is against the law to deny someone a home loan based on the color of their skin, right? Guess what? A banker uses the AI, and if the banker uses that AI to decide in the incorrect way, and denies a loan because of a discriminatory practice, it's the banker's fault. But if it's the algorithm that generates the problem, it's the makers of the algorithm's fault, right? And then, really big AI. What does big AI mean? The Europeans have defined it as 10 to the 25th flops. Right? Meaning a flop is like, think of it as like some kind of execution, like something had to happen. And so 10 to the 25th power number of flops requires like 200,000 megawatts of power. That's big, okay? Two gals or two guys in a garage ain't producing something that requires 200,000 megawatts of power, okay? So really big AI, guess what? Some third party got to check under the hood and make sure they're using and doing the best practices in developing that stuff, right? In the US's case, I trust NIST to be able to do that. So super powerful AI do that, right? And we have to learn, sorry for the long-winded answer to this, we have to learn from previous experience. Look, I was very successful in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is like a $17 trillion industry. Why? We carved software out of product liability laws. So it was not required. So what's the height? Was it 66? Does that come down here? If you're barreling down 65, right? Barreling down Interstate 95, and your tire explodes because of faulty manufacturing of the rubber in the tire, who's at fault? Whoever built that tire. Same laws do not apply to software. Now, we're not going back, but we learned that. We carved social media out of the laws that govern Wall Street Journal, Fox News, CNN, the local NBC affiliate. We carved those as the Section 230 that everybody talks about. We carved social media out of that, and what happened? Nobody has ever, like Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Fox News is not causing young girls to increase self-harm. We know social media is doing that. One of the reasons, we carved it out of the same rules. So let's not make that mistake with AI. And if you look at the two people that are the leaders in developing the AI lab, saying something needs to happen, they're not worried about it's going to hurt innovation. I think that's an argument that you're not going to hurt innovation. And so this matters. Now, whoever, Vladimir Putin, I get tired of saying this, but I think it was in 2014, Vladimir Putin said whoever masters AI is going to master the world, right? I think that's the only thing Vladimir Putin and I agree on. And it's true. And so this is going to define that race with China, but I always think we have a leg up, because the advances that we're going to see in getting to super intelligence or artificial general intelligence is going to require a level of openness, creativity, and cooperation that you do not see in a place like China. Now, quantum computing, that we know the 200 steps to get there, and it requires money, time, effort. If you can move all factors of production towards that one thing, I think the Chinese can beat us when it comes to quantum. So that's a long way. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, we have to wrap up, but no, that's okay.
So
I think there are three.
floor?
I think there are still.
We'll do quick ones. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna actually say that if the final three people want to just ask their questions in order, and then you can sort of make one
I'll do
answer
that.
to do all of them.
Yes, you can. Let's hear it.
What do you think is the best thing you've done for the USA?
Oh, good question. All right.
Okay. Next.
So I think one of the big reasons for the mistrust in government is how the perception of money and business interest in driving government policy. So I was wondering, what was your experience dealing with lobbyists, and do you feel that they are a positive or a negative force in American politics?
Money and politics, lobbyists. What the best thing I did
Final
for the USA?
question.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make you answer 3 questions. I'll come up to you later.
I appreciate that. Honestly, thanks for the question. What I think the best thing I did for the USA, I tried to be an example, right? Like I tried to be honest. Like all those things we all learned in kindergarten, treat people with respect, be honest, right? Like I tried to do that, and I tried to live my life that way. And I think being an example that, look, no one agrees with everything I've said, but I think whether you wherever folks are on the political spectrum, they're like, he's an okay guy, right? So I think being that example is the thing. Look, lobbyist is a term that's thrown around that it means different things to different people. Look, the super PAC money, a lobbyist can give the same amount of money as anybody else, right? The super PACs are the ones that have a disproportional influence on campaigns, in my opinion. And I've never seen a race where one super PAC was only one super PAC. If one super PAC's in, the opposite super PAC is in, and there's millions of dollars flowing, and who benefits from that? Political consultants and TV stations, right? And so to me, that's the thing that is. Now you could say maybe those people are lobbyists, but USAA was in my district. They have a lobbyist, and guess what? They represent a lot of people that work for that company that live in my district, and they were funneling some of those issues. And so, they're providing a service, and a individual member of Congress who only has capped the number of staff you can have to have a level of expertise, you're never going to get it. So there is some value in that ecosystem. Now, what would I do? I would always get everybody's opinion, not just one. Right, and healthcare is a good example of that. I wanted people from all part of that healthcare stack to do that. So that's my take on that. And I'm going to end with a quick story. And
No, it's okay. That's fine. It's up to you. As long as I don't get in trouble for going over, take as much time as you want.
So when I was in the CIA in Pakistan, I was it was 2008, an earthquake hits Pakistan, ends up killing 90,000 people. My ambassador at the time said, hey, we want to figure out how we can show support to the Pakistani people, get up there and figure out what you need. And I get up there, and this is, they needed airlift. It was in a town called Muzaffarabad, the general area, 14,000 feet. There was villages that were cut off from the rest of the society, and we needed to go pick some of these people up. So we got 21 Chinooks delivered, and I'm directing this airlift. And I had been there for about 5 days, and I was supposed to get on one of these helicopters to go back to brief the ambassador. And we hear this one village had been without food, water, power for 5 days. And it was middle of winter, negative 20 degrees below zero. In Texas, I got to explain what negative 20 feels like. I think y'all got a little good sense up here in VA. And so I said, hey, let's go pick them up, take them with us, right? So we land in this village, big bay doors of the Chinook helicopter open up, and all these village folks start piling on the helicopter, about 200. Village elder had this little girl, 6, 7 years old, lost both her mother and father in the earthquake. And she sees this scene, thinks it's from outer space, and she's crying. And this village elder hands this little girl to me. And I'm holding on to her as tight as I can, and she's crying. I can't even imagine what she was feeling with. And we take off, and halfway through the flight, she finally relaxes and lays her head on my shoulder. And we get to our destination, and we open the big bay doors, and I put the little girl down, and she takes about 10 steps, turns around, and comes back and gives me the biggest hug I've ever gotten in my life. And she goes over to the helicopter crewman and kisses him on the hand, and he pats her on the head, gives her a thumbs up. She smiles real big, returns a gesture, and the little girl runs away, right? And that girl's face is seared into my brain. Because on that day, the United States of America was the only country that had the resources and the willingness to help people even if they were 7,000 miles away. And that story reminds me is that the reason the United States of America has become an exceptional nation is not because of what we have taken, but because of what we have given, right? And if we remember that, we're going to be able to continue this experiment for another 250 years.
On that note, thank you very much, Will. Thank you, Melody. Thank you, Karsh. And that brings us to an end of the program.